Let's take a break. Coffee break, that is. Mura ng cafecito.
Welcome to another coffee break where we're able to learn, discuss, and discover various topics. I'm glad you're able to join me on your coffee break today. So grab yourself a hot cup of coffee or a cold cup of coffee and have a seat. Today's topic, we'll be taking a good look at intersectionality in substance use disorders and prevention, and how they both actually work together to be able to improve substance abuse disorders and help the prevention field, and especially because it's what the prevention field is wanting and looking for. So if you don't have a pen or a pen handy, make sure that you do save this for future reference. So we're going to dive right into it. This definitely will be broken up into a couple different episodes or sections, so that you are able to take this in either all at once or in sections on your break. So let's dive right into it, because there's definitely a lot of information that we will cover, and especially I'll help you to, and we together will examine the concept of intersectionality as it applies to identity in substance use disorders and prevention programs. And hopefully it will create an argument for the power of prevention movements working together to ensure that intersectionality is part of your programming and your process. And of course, it's also an opportunity for you to examine the possibility of building inclusive programs and movements for advancing prevention itself. So let's dive right in, and we'll get started with doing a little review. It's important always to review some things that are, by their own nature, interconnected. So I just want to make sure that we do review the determinants of health, because they do fall under several broad categories, such as policymaking, social factors, health services, individual behaviors, biology, and genetics. And these interrelationships are among some of the factors that determine individual and a population's health. And then, of course, these are intervention, or could be part of the interventions that target multiple determinants of health that are most likely to be effective. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to understanding that. So the factors that impact everyone's health, of course, are income, social status, healthy behaviors, employment and working conditions, access to health services, education and literacy, biology, and your own genetic endowment, your childhood experiences, your gender, definitely your physical environments, your own culture, and of course the social supports or your social networks and coping skills that are around you. And studies definitely reveal that the factors that I just mentioned, or the areas that I just mentioned, along with other social factors like systemic racism and sexism, impact a person's health. And specifically thinking about a theory called intersectionality, and the connection has been made since the early 2000s, but more so in about 2018, 2020. And in looking at what's called intersectionality, and the fact that people exposed to racism have a poorer health outcome, particularly mental health issues, alongside both reduced access to healthcare and poorer patient experiences. And that's what some of the studies have revealed, and that's the social determinants of health. Therefore, have told us that health is affected by more than just exercise and healthy eating. And definitely, as part of some of the sociological studies being done, specifically sociological study by Sheffield in 2020, the research suggests that we in the field need to acknowledge intersectionality, the systems and theories that work effectively in the field of substance use and substance use disorders. And so, it's important that we discover and look to understand intersectionality, and it's important that that we also understand that it's a term that caught on and has caught on in the last few years. But I think the biggest question is, well, what is it, and what's it got to do with prevention and substance use disorders? So let's start there, I guess. Um, so Bowleg in 2012, stated that applying the intersectionality framework to um, substance use disparities is very complicated, because this framework was not initially intended to explain health outcomes. An intersectionality framework highlights the intersection of multiple identities with interlocking systems of oppression and privilege, and that it accentuates the experiences individuals from multiple minority identities. The concept of intersectionality describes the ways in which systems of inequality based on gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, identity, disability, class, and other forms of discrimination intersect to create unique and dynamic effects. Um, and of course, it's an acknowledging that everyone has their own unique experience of discrimination and oppression, and also that all forms of inequality are mutually reinforcing, and therefore must be analyzed and addressed simultaneously in order to prevent one form of inequality from reinforcing another. And as an example, if we're tackling the availability of alcohol alone without including the other dimensions such as race, socioeconomic status, and even immigration status, that will likely reinforce inequalities among minorities. So it's definitely important to look at all sides, not just from a very narrow focus and a very narrow perspective. And this definitely reminds me of a quote that you might or might not have heard of either yet or in your life, and it's by Audre Lorde. And it says that there is no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we do not live single issue lives. And that's very deep in itself. And I'll repeat, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we do not live single issue lives. And it definitely rings true when it comes to talking about substance use disorders and programming the interventions and treatment to address such issues, of course, in our field of prevention, and how intersectionality has a major impact on how we look at those. So, I don't know how many of you have heard of the term intersectionality, or have even heard of intersectionality, but this term was coined back in 1989 by a civil rights advocate, Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, to help explain the oppression of African American women. So it begs for the question, why does intersectionality matter? And it really matters because it gives us a way to understand conceptually how multiple identities intersect and produce understandings of difference that impact all of our lives. So it's definitely a lens through which we can see where power comes and where power collides. If you can envision a street intersection, and how um, traffic per se is interlocking and intersecting. It's really the understanding that it's not simply that there's a race problem here, a gender problem there, a class, uh, LGBT, et cetera. But intersectionality itself refers to the complex overlapping effects of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, and classism, and in our case, as it relates to substance use. Uh, so there probably already are some examples that you know. How does alcohol and other drugs affect your sense of identity? And a person's identity is truly complicated. It's composed of how you see yourself, how others see you, really, what's really there despite what you or others don't see, and what nobody can see, right? So a good portion of your full identity as a person is generally not even known to you. So when you introduce drugs and alcohol in excessive quantities, pieces of your identity start getting clouded. And first of all, the acute effects of drugs and alcohol blur your short-term memories of your own actions and your own feelings. And this adds to the part that you don't know clearly about yourself. And parts of your identity are also your personal growth and your maturity. And this definitely involves having your own ideas and beliefs, and these are being challenged, and giving up some of those ideas, and embracing new ones. And this usually includes, of course, emotional pain, surprise, definitely some suffering, some stress, and lots of confusion, right? So drugs and alcohol, cloud your experiences, and they have the power to disrupt your emotions, and thus this reduces your ability to have self-understanding and self-worth. And this is some of how it has been defined by some treatment specialists, namely Wendy Lee Netwig from a Skyward Recovery program. I definitely want to make mention of that, because of a lot of how we think about um, the effects of intersectionality on our self of identity come from the research in the field. And identity and substance abuse is really based on some very limited literature in regard to people's identity and development and substance use. But it is hypothesized that participants that use drugs and alcohol will have a greater identity exploration, greater identity distress, more psychological symptoms, and will be lower in identifying commitment. And it is further hypothesized that participants uh, in identity will be most likely to use drugs and alcohol due to their tendencies toward conflict with authority and high anxiety. Uh, and for some, substance abuse or substance use is a form of exploration, rebelliousness, uh, self-medication, and some of these people or individuals tend to be drifters who are usually very easily influenced. So which personality traits increase problematic alcohol use or other drug use? And they could definitely possibly include your openness to experience, right? And it's also known as the YOLO attitude. It's hey, you only live once, why not try it? It's also conscientiousness, a person's own extroversion uh, in society, their naiveness or agreeableness, if that's even a word. Uh, People's own neuroticism, right? The degree to which they experience the world negatively, and of course, the risk of excessive drug use are all personality traits that could increase, uh, the problematic use of drugs. And research definitely shows that, for instance, cannabis um, is associated with existing bipolar disorders, and it's definitely increasingly being linked to schizophrenia and bipolar disorders. As a side note, and PTSD veterans with PTSD found that marijuana use was also linked with the worsening of intrusive thoughts, and also that there is an elevated risk for depression and suicidality among adolescent marijuana users. Excuse me. And that that cannabis has a neutral impact on anxiety. And the research shows uh, that about 1 in 10 people who use marijuana will develop cannabis use disorder, and that's rising to 1 in 6 among those who start before the age of 18. So, intersectionality. What is intersectionality, and why is intersectionality interesting? Excuse me, and why, or what I should say, is intersecting, and especially when it comes to society, people, and sociological understandings. So, in thinking about the term intersectionality, I think we can definitely dissect that, and take it apart. So, if you can imagine a street intersection, for example, what exactly is intersecting, right? So we have, in a street, you have cars, you have people, you have buildings, you have, um, tourists, you have, et cetera, et cetera. So we have, and that's representative of society, and social standards, and the ways of being, and when it comes to people, it's people's ideals, right? um, you know Dissecting that, and defining that even further. Well, what are people made of? um, and identity drives um, the sense of self, value, perceptions, and how we connect ourselves and the world, and how we recognize it. Uh, so, then it further begs for the question, well, what are identities made up of? And it's really made up of what we feel, what we're taught, what we're told. And this is all through social conditioning, messaging, and imagery, right? So, um, we definitely have to understand ourselves, understand others through whether it's their personal identity and their social identity as a whole. And it's very important to try to understand, um, society and people as a whole rather than in piecemeal. And intersectionality is that lens which allows us to see where power comes and where power collides, and where it interlocks and where it intersects. And it's really not simply that there's a race problem, or that there's a gender problem, or that there's a class problem, or that there is a drug problem, right? Intersectionality refers to the complex overlapping effects of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, classism, and of course, in our case, as it relates to substance abuse. So if you can imagine a identity wheel, right? It usually starts with the innermost circle, and this is comprised of unique circumstances of privilege and power that come with one person's and one person's unique identity. And as an example, what family you belong to, what opportunities you've had, what you've done with these opportunities, and what exposures you've been privy to. And this is compounded by a second layer, which comprises of personal identity aspects. And these things are a mix of identity, that can change, right? And these factors include your age, education, occupation, social status, religion, and even those things that we cannot change, things like skin color, your ethnic background, your work history, and in combination with unique circumstances of power, of privilege and identity, and your personal identity factors, this can definitely help to create a very unique experience for you, or for people as individuals. And that's and that's one that's definitely um you know between and that definitely marks the difference between um something that's marginal. And next, you have uh the types of discrimination that impact a person's identity, and those things could include racism, ableism, ageism, discrimination, heterosexism, sexism, and many more, right? By merely possessing a certain identity, uh, it's all that it takes to determine whether one falls at receiving any type of discriminatory treatment. And this is the basis for discrimination. And it's often a combination of historical practices of discrimination, um, racialized perspectives, ignorance, demonization, and people's fear of psychosis around certain identities. And of course, then we have the final layer. And the final layer comprises structures that either um, augment your own reality, or keep existing discrimination alive. And these are based on economy, globalization, war, education systems, politics, and things of that nature. So when these factors interact, we definitely find ourselves in a place where our personal identities, with or without, um, these unique privileges uh, or powers, uh, that if they interact with social forces that operate certain kinds of discrimination, which are then um, propped up and supported by social structures that keep this discrimination alive, or hold or continue to hold you down based on these social structures. So it's definitely important to understand that why intersectionality matters, and intersectionality is essential to us understanding gender, sexual diversity, both of which are certainly impacted by other social identities. In order to create a diverse and inclusive spaces, whether it's at work, in public, and that we should be open-minded enough and willing to think about differences, uh, and of course power, and oppression, in increasingly in very very complex ways. And it gives us a way to understand conceptually how multiple identities intersect and produce understandings of difference that impact our lives. So hopefully I'll be able to insert some clips in the way that I see it, when it comes to defining intersectionality, and defining uh, your own personal or your client's identities, and helping them to understand self-identity, social identity, personal identity, and so forth, right? Which is very important. So it's, again, definitely a lot to absorb, but it's always important to look at new ways to be able to help people, right? And understanding now that substance use disorders are an identity problem, uh, it helps us to really dive deep when it comes to answering those questions that we work so hard to try to understand. Of course, What makes some people stay clean, and why others stay addicted, and how can we create a society in which everyone has a chance to live a long, healthy, drug-free life. And I always am working towards working with others in trying to develop those strategies that address the relationships between someone's health status and someone's biology, someone's individual behavior, and connect those to the health services, the social factors that have an impact on their lives, whether it's positively or negatively. And if they are negatively, how can we find ways to mitigate that? And of course, policies that help to keep someone down, um, per se. So definitely a lot to consider. And again, just to summarize as a whole, intersectionality is the concept that describes the ways in which systems of inequality based on gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, your own identity, your disability class, and other forms of discrimination intersect to create unique dynamics and effects. And, we must acknowledge that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination and oppression. And that, once we understand that, then we can see how uh, this understanding can work in our favor in understanding how to use it, and how to help us in prevention when it comes to substance use disorders. So that is definitely a lot to take in, especially when something so new, perhaps for you, or trying to find a way to use one process to have an impact on another process. But that's it for today's coffee break. So make sure that you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, and share this video. So get back to work or whatever it is that you were doing, and we'll see you at the next coffee break. Should you want a very in-depth workshop on this particular topic of intersectionality and SUDs and prevention, feel free to get at me. Let's